Hey Darksiders, welcome to the channel, especially if you are new here. As a matter of fact, if you are new here and you like comic books and you like comic book movies, then make sure you hit that subscribe button because that is what we do here at the channel. So if that's your thing, you guys join us as we get into a lot of things comic books and those things comic books that are turned into movies. We talk about that on this channel a lot. So here's what I want to do today. You know, there's been a lot of videos out looking at DC versus Marvel, especially as it relates to movie making and why Marvel is having so much more success than DC. So I want to talk about that a little bit today. I'm going to try and keep this video short, but there's a lot of things I've been thinking about, and I've been actually reading a lot of books about the origins of different comic books. And one of the things I notice about Marvel is that they do something fundamentally different from the beginning with their heroes that DC doesn't do. And I think it is that thing that makes the movie so much more successful. So we're going to talk about those elements, and I want to know what you think. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you think that I don't have it right at all, then let's talk about that, and you guys can certainly let me know what you think about that. So here's the first thing I think. I think that one of the reasons that the Marvel movies do so well is really because of the character development, but not just the character development starting with the MCU. I'm talking about taking it way back to when Stan was actually creating some of these characters. If you notice some things about the Marvel characters, there's a couple of things that make those characters really accessible to us that DC doesn't so much do in its early days. Though, in its early days, DC really was kicking Marvel's butt with some of his iconic characters. But Stan always strived to make characters that were very accessible to the reader. So the first thing that you notice about a lot of the DC characters is that they are very flawed. So these are characters that have these superpowers, these grand abilities, but they are still flawed in some way. Even when you're talking about Captain America, right? The iconic American poster boy for truth, justice, and the American way. Yes, I know that that is Superman's mantra, but that essentially is what Cap stands for, basically, in the comic books. But even he is flawed when it comes to having to deal with the conflict of having this idealized way of acting, this totally kind of upright and moral way of acting, and then to realize as he's interacting with people around him that everybody doesn't think that way, that the world doesn't operate that way, and him trying to keep his moral center while dealing with the folks around him. You can see the conflict within him. When you think about most Marvel characters, there's always that element of conflict within them, and I think that that element is really what makes them resonate with you and me. There is something about the way that these characters have been developed that really humanizes them outside of their superpowers. So essentially they are human beings with superpowers, mutants, whatever you want to call them, but they all have conflicts. And then the way that some of these stories are actually written, when you think about the X-Men, when you think about the conflict between what's going on with them and the rest of the world, and Professor X trying to protect them, all of these characters have vulnerabilities woven into them. And I think that those vulnerabilities are really what resonates with us as the viewer. You don't have that so much in DC, where you do have these characters with superpowers, but they're almost always upright, almost always doing the right things, almost always not really suffering or struggling with some kind of moral dilemma in terms of what action to take. You had that earlier on in DC. Now, DC does take a little bit of a pivot away from that and really does begin to humanize their characters with some internal conflicts and struggles and decision makings and things like that. And to me, the biggest place you really see this is with The Dark Knight, especially when Frank Miller begins to write that series. But Marvel has always kind of set that groundwork from the beginning, and I think that it's one of the things that's carried over into the film, but I think it's one of the points of access we have with these characters, even before the MCU came along, that we always had this connection. You feel the connection with Spider-Man, especially if you're a teenager, because he is a person that just kind of struggles with his whole identity of being a hero, struggles with wrapping his mind around his powers, how to use his powers, dealing with that, and then just the normal relationships of being a teen. All of those different elements are things that we were already attached to before the MCU movies came out. So when they did come out and we saw those things continue in the movies, it was easy for us to connect with them. That's one thing. Another thing that you might not think about, which I think was brilliant on Stan's part, is the setting of the hero. Do you notice that all of the settings in Marvel movies are all places that we know? New York, So when we see Spider-Man swinging from building to building or swinging across bridges, you can say, oh man, I know that bridge. I recognize that building, because they are situated in places that are familiar with us. Again, another point of connection for us, the viewer, to the reader, if we're talking about Marvel comic books, or especially the movies, because we can make those connections. We know those places. We live in those places, right? Los Angeles, if you're talking about the West Coast Avengers, again, all of these points of contact or location that are familiar with the readers because they are actually based in real life locations. You don't really have that in DC so much. You've got Metropolis and you've got all these different places, but none of these places are actually based in real situations. None of these places are actually places that are located on Earth. They're not places that you and I have inhabited every day. So when we go through these different storylines and we meet all these different characters in these different locations that we're familiar with, again, it's a point of connection for us, and it really helps us to connect and relate with the characters. I think that is the biggest selling point of the MCU. Now, not a lot of people talked about that, or I've not heard a lot of people talk about that. I've heard people talk about the direction. I've heard people talk about the writing. I've heard people talk about the cinematography, but I don't think that those are the biggest reasons why the MCU is doing so well. Certainly, I think the MCU, the writing is fantastic, and that especially with the Captain America series. I mean, it's just so good. They do such a good job of consistent storytelling for the most part. There are some problems here and there and some holes and some continuity issues among some of the movies, but on the whole, they do a really good job of connecting things consistently throughout the movies. So I think that some of these other things might be important, but honestly, when you think about it, some of the writers are really accomplished writers for some of the DC films. Some of the directors are accomplished directors. Certainly, they're not starving for talent because they have that. So what is going on with DC? I think it's for the reason that I said. I think that DC has not really established these characters from the beginning in a way that connects with us. Now, as I said, as DC begins to write more comics and things begin to evolve in DC, you do get the vulnerabilities of characters in the DC comics, and you also they try to bring you that in the DCU, but for some reason it just doesn't seem to stick, and I think that that's what it is. So those are just my thoughts, you guys. I just felt like I was going to hop on and share it. I would love to know if you agree, disagree, if you have some other reasons why you think Marvel is doing so well and DC is struggling. I do want to say before I close is that one thing I do want to say is that I do think that also DC's continuity in terms of the movies with building a universe has been really good. I mean, I think it's great that Feige has really mapped out a plan, and one of the things that he's done so well is that you can see elements of the other movies with the movies that come before. So you can see kind of these little Easter eggs or these little hints towards movies to come, and he has really built a consistent universe, which I think really helps to bring the continuity of all the movies together. Thus, we have Infinity Wars coming in the next 5 weeks or so, or past, depending on when you see this video. But all those things I think are really important to really make a cohesive viewing experience for the MCU. He's done a great job at that. But I think the nucleus, as I said, is how Stan has developed these characters from the beginning. And it's interesting because you might be able to find it on YouTube. You can find some interviews hearing him talk about his rationale or his reasoning for developing some of the characters that he developed and why he developed them and things like that. And he's always had characters that have been a little bit on the cutting edge as a result to that. When you think about Black Panther, the success of that has been phenomenal. And Stan was the one that came up and invented a character like that. Stan said in an interview that he would actually, DC approached him about redoing some of their prominent characters, and you should hear some of the directions that he would take them. I think he made either Superman or Black Man. He was thinking about making him a black guy or something like that. So Stan has always thought out of the box, and he's been able to create characters in a way that's accessible to us. And I think it's because of the elements that I just outlined in this video. So listen, I would love to know what you think about that, what your thoughts are about that. Guys, again, if you like comics and you like comic book movies, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. We've been doing a lot around Civil War. I said Civil War. I meant Infinity War. I really am excited about Infinity War. You know, everybody makes mistakes. Let's just finish it up. I'm literally speechless because I said before, this is Marvel's big pivot point, and a lot of surprises coming in this movie. Some things that we think we know, some things that I don't think that we can really tell. from this final trailer that we got. Some things I think that we think are going in a direction that might not be, and then some things I think that we've seen that might be exactly what we think they are. But it's just so exciting because the Russo brothers have said this is going to be kind of like the film to top all Marvel films so far. So a lot of surprises coming in this film. So I can't wait. Bought my tickets yesterday. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that. But what are your thoughts, you guys? What do you think? How is it that Marvel is doing so well at the theaters and DC is struggling? Is it a matter of direction? Is it writing? Is it acting? Or do you agree with what I said about the core of the character development that really starts way back in the day before there was a DCU, before there was an MCU? That's what I think the nucleus is. I think that Marvel really did such a good job of that, and that's why we connect with them. So guys, thank you so much. Please make sure that you subscribe again if you like talking comics, comic book movies. Hit that subscribe button. That's what we do here on Dark Side Movie Reviews. Thank you guys again so much. And with that, I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.